The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, Eastern Standard Time. In the depths of Al-Udeid Air Base, Qatar, Master Sergeant Rodriguez jolted upright from her desk, coffee spilling across mission reports. The transmission wasn't coming through normal channels. It was weak, fragmented, bleeding through emergency frequencies like a ghost trying to speak from beyond the grave. Any station, this is." The voice dissolved into white noise, then surged back. "Requesting immediate coordinates 479er." Rodriguez's fingers flew across her console, triangulating the signal. According to every database, every mission log, every piece of intelligence crossing her desk that night, there should be no friendly aircraft in that sector. The last sortie had returned 6 hours ago. The sky over northern Iraq belonged to the enemy now. But someone was up there, broadcasting on a frequency that hadn't been used since the Gulf War. Someone who knew protocols that weren't taught anymore, using call signs that existed only in classified archives. The signal strength suggested an aircraft flying low, very low, through terrain that would shred anything larger than a sparrow. General Marcus Webb stood behind her, his weathered face illuminated by the green glow of radar screens. He'd been monitoring radio traffic for 37 years, long enough to recognize the impossible when it whispered through his headset. His jaw tightened as he processed what he was hearing. "Sir," Rodriguez whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of electronics, "that transmission is coming from Grid 77 Alpha." Webb's blood ran cold. Grid 77 Alpha was a smoking crater now, had been for the last 14 hours. Satellite imagery showed nothing but twisted metal and burning fuel. The rescue teams hadn't found so much as a flight boot in the wreckage. 2 F-16s, 1 A-10 Thunderbolt II, all listed as total losses. 3 pilots marked as killed in action, their families already notified, their names already being etched into black granite. The static cleared for exactly 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, a voice emerged from the electronic void with crystalline clarity. It was tired, strained, but unmistakably alive. More importantly, it was unmistakably familiar. "Control, this is Phantom 77. I'm still here." Webb's hand trembled as he reached for his headset. Phantom 77 was Captain Alexis "Ghost" Reeves, the pilot everyone said was too small for the cockpit, too quiet for command, too precise for her own good. The pilot he'd personally declared killed in action 12 hours ago. The pilot whose funeral arrangements were already being made back at Nellis Air Force Base. But dead pilots don't broadcast on emergency frequencies. Dead pilots don't navigate through hostile airspace with navigation equipment that should be scattered across 50 square miles of desert. The transmission had lasted exactly 43 seconds before dissolving back into static, but it was enough. Webb grabbed the secure phone, his fingers dialing a number that would wake up half the Pentagon. Because if Phantom 77 was still alive, still flying, still fighting somewhere in that hellscape of smoke and sand, then everything they thought they knew about the mission, about the losses, about the war itself, was wrong. The hunt for Captain Alexis Reeves was about to begin. 12 hours earlier, the mission briefing had been routine, almost boring in its predictability. Captain Reeves sat in the back row of the briefing room, her slight frame dwarfed by the massive ejection seats that would soon cradle pilots twice her size. At 5'4" and barely 130 pounds, she looked more like a college student who'd wandered into the wrong building than one of the most lethal close air support pilots in the United States Air Force. The mission was supposed to be simple: provide air cover for a convoy moving through the Anbar province, keep the road clear, return home in time for dinner. Standard Tuesday afternoon flying for the 354th Fighter Squadron, the kind of mission that seasoned pilots could execute in their sleep. Colonel James "Hammer" Morrison clicked through PowerPoint slides with mechanical precision, his voice carrying the weight of a man who'd briefed 1,000 similar missions. Grid references, threat assessments, rules of engagement, all delivered in the same monotone that had put junior officers to sleep since the invention of military presentations. Primary threat remains small arms fire from concealed positions, Morrison droned, laser pointer dancing across satellite imagery. No significant anti-aircraft capabilities reported in the area of operations. Reeves studied the photographs with different eyes than her male counterparts. Where they saw open desert and scattered buildings, she saw shadows that could hide RPG teams, elevation changes that could mask surface-to-air missile sites, choke points where a well-placed IED could turn a routine convoy escort into a shooting gallery. She'd earned her call sign Ghost, not for her diminutive stature, but for her ability to see threats that others missed, to slip through defensive networks that should have been impenetrable, to appear exactly where the enemy least expected her. In 6 deployments across 3 theaters of operation, she'd never lost a pilot under her protection, never failed to bring her aircraft home. But reputation meant nothing to the pilots sitting around her. To them, she was still the anomaly, the diversity hire, the political statement in a flight suit. They tolerated her presence because regulations demanded it, but respect was something she'd have to earn in combat, one mission at a time. Lieutenant Stryker Hawkins, all Texas swagger and quarterback confidence, leaned back in his chair until it creaked under his weight. Think Ghost can keep up today, or should we plan for a solo mission? The comment drew chuckles from the younger pilots, the ones who still believed that flying fast and looking good was enough to win wars. Reeves didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge that she'd heard. She'd learned long ago that actions spoke louder than words, especially in a profession where words could get you killed. Morrison wrapped up the briefing with practiced efficiency, checking his watch as pilots filed toward the door. Outside, the desert sun was beginning its daily assault on anything foolish enough to venture onto the flight line. In 3 hours, they'd be airborne, racing across hostile territory at 300 miles per hour, their lives dependent on training, technology, and the kind of split-second decision-making that separated the living from the memorial plaques. Reeves gathered her materials slowly, methodically, the way she did everything. As the briefing room emptied, she remained behind, studying the mission maps one final time. Something about this flight felt different, though she couldn't articulate exactly what. Call it intuition, call it experience, call it the kind of sixth sense that kept pilots alive in places where mistakes were measured in body bags. The mission would launch in 2 hours and 47 minutes. By sunset, everything would change. The A-10 Thunderbolt II sat on the tarmac like a predator at rest, its twin engines and distinctive straight wings giving it the appearance of something designed by function rather than form. Unlike the sleek fighters that captured headlines and Hollywood contracts, the A-10 was built for one purpose: killing tanks and keeping soldiers alive. It was ugly, slow, and absolutely devastating in the hands of someone who understood its capabilities. Reeves completed her pre-flight inspection with the thoroughness of a surgeon preparing for surgery. Every rivet, every panel, every system that would keep her alive for the next 6 hours received her complete attention. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon, that 7-barrel monster that formed the airplane's spine, was loaded with 1,174 rounds of 30 depleted uranium ammunition. Each round could punch through 3 inches of steel armor at 1,000 yards. Her crew chief, Technical Sergeant Mike "Wrench" Thompson, watched her work with professional appreciation. In 15 years of maintaining A-10s, he'd never seen a pilot more meticulous in their pre-flight routine. Where other pilots trusted their ground crews and signed off on inspections, Reeves verified everything personally. "She's ready to hunt, Captain," Thompson said, his Boston accent cutting through the desert heat. "All systems green, full load of Freedom dispensers ready for delivery." Reeves nodded, running her hands along the aircraft's scarred titanium skin. This particular had survived 3 deployments and more combat missions than most pilots would see in entire careers. The nose art, A grinning skull wearing aviator sunglasses had been painted by crews who were now rotating back to civilian life or manning desks at the Pentagon. The aircraft's official designation was 80248, but everyone called her Mercy, not because she showed mercy to enemies, but because she'd shown mercy to dozens of friendly ground units who'd found themselves in impossible situations, outgunned and outnumbered, with only the distinctive sound of twin turbofans to announce that salvation was inbound. Climbing into the cockpit was like settling into a familiar armchair, every switch and display positioned exactly where years of training had conditioned her hands to expect them. The ejection seat embraced her small frame perfectly, unlike the fighters designed around pilots who looked like linebackers. Here, in this cramped space surrounded by instruments and weapon systems, size was irrelevant. What mattered was skill, and Reeves possessed that in abundance. She powered up systems in sequence, watching as displays illuminated and computers came online. GPS showed her position with meter accuracy. Radar painted a clear picture of friendly and hostile airspace, and the targeting pod beneath her aircraft's nose began its electronic search for threats that hadn't revealed themselves yet. Phantom 77, you are cleared for takeoff, the tower controller announced, his voice crackling through her headset with professional boredom. Reeves advanced the throttles, feeling 9,065 pounds of thrust push her back into her seat as Mercy accelerated down the runway. At rotation speed, she pulled back on the stick, and the desert fell away beneath them, transformed from an endless expanse of sand and rock into a tactical map marked with invisible boundaries and potential kill zones. Climbing through 10,000 feet, she could see the convoy they were tasked to protect, a string of vehicles moving north through terrain that had been contested since the beginning of recorded history. From this altitude, they looked like toys, vulnerable and slow, dependent on her eyes and weapons to reach their destination alive. The radio chattered with routine communications as other aircraft checked in, but underneath the professional calm, everyone understood the stakes. Today, like every day, someone might not come home. The convoy snaked through Route Tampa like a mechanical caterpillar, 27 vehicles carrying supplies that would keep Forward Operating Base Courage operational for another month. Staff Sergeant David Kim watched the landscape scroll pass through his gun truck's reinforced windows, every shadow and pile of rubble registering as a potential threat in his combat-trained mind. Kim had been running convoy security for 8 months, long enough to develop the paranoid vigilance that kept soldiers alive in places where the enemy looked like civilians until they started shooting. His vehicle, an up-armored Humvee mounting a .50 caliber machine gun, rode third in the formation, positioned to respond rapidly to threats from either direction. Overwatch, this is ground actual, Kim's voice crackled through the radio net, using the call sign designated for convoy commanders. We're 20 minutes out from checkpoint Bravo, all vehicles accounted for. High above, Captain Reeves adjusted her orbit pattern, keeping the convoy in sight while scanning for the threats that intelligence insisted weren't there. Her radar showed clear skies, her targeting pod revealed empty desert, but something felt wrong. The roads were too quiet, the buildings too vacant, the entire landscape too peaceful for a region where peace was usually measured in minutes between firefights. Ground actual, this is Phantom 77, Reeves transmitted, her voice calm and professional despite the growing unease in her gut. I've got eyes on your position. Route looks clear from up here, but I'm seeing some interesting shadows about 2 clicks north of your current position. Kim keyed his radio, grateful for the professional competence in the pilot's voice. He'd worked with air support before, knew the difference between pilots who understood ground combat and those who treated it like a video game. This one sounded like she knew what she was doing. Copy Phantom 77. We'll keep our eyes open down here. The convoy maintained its steady pace, diesel engines straining against the grade as they climbed through terrain that had seen armies march and die for thousands of years. In the back of each vehicle, soldiers checked weapons and body armor, the casual conversation of the departure point replaced by the focused silence that preceded contact. Reeves expanded her search pattern, using her aircraft's sensors to probe deeper into the surrounding desert. Thermal imaging revealed the normal signatures of desert life: small animals seeking shade, the residual heat of rocks that had baked under the sun all day, the geometric patterns of irrigation ditches that had been abandoned when war made farming impossible. Then she saw it, a reflection so brief it might have been imagination, a glint of metal where no metal should exist. She banked left, bringing her targeting pod to bear on the suspected position. The image that filled her display made her blood freeze. Surface-to-air missiles. Not the improvised weapons that insurgents usually employed, but military-grade hardware, Soviet-built SA-6 gainfuls that could reach out and touch aircraft at altitudes where pilots thought they were safe. The missile battery was perfectly positioned, concealed in a wadi that provided natural camouflage while offering clear fields of fire. "Ground actual, Phantom 7-7, Reeves transmitted, her training keeping her voice steady despite the adrenaline now flooding her system. "You need to halt your movement immediately. I've got multiple SAM sites in your path, approximately 1,500 meters north of Checkpoint Bravo." Kim's response was immediate. All stations, this is ground actual. Full stop, full stop. Take cover positions and prepare for possible contact." The convoy scattered like startled birds, vehicles pulling off the road and seeking whatever concealment the desert offered. Soldiers poured out of trucks and Humvees, establishing defensive positions with the practiced efficiency of troops who'd done this too many times before. But halting the convoy had triggered something else, something that intelligence had missed completely. Hidden observers, positioned to watch the road, began transmitting coordinates to weapons teams that had been waiting for exactly this moment. The trap was closing, and everyone was about to discover just how wrong the intelligence briefing had been. The first missile launch looked like a distant firework, a brief streak of light ascending from the desert floor toward a point in the sky where physics and mathematics would determine whether Captain Reeves lived or died. Her aircraft's threat warning system erupted in electronic chaos, multiple tones competing to inform her that death was approaching at 3 times the speed of sound. Reeves didn't panic. Panic was a luxury that pilots couldn't afford, a emotion that transformed skilled aviators into smoking holes in the ground. Instead, she did what years of training had programmed into her muscle memory. She maneuvered aggressively, dumped chaff and flares, and began hunting for the source of the threat. The SA-6 gainful missed her aircraft by less than 50 feet, its proximity fuse detonating in a sphere of hot metal fragments that peppered Mercy's left wing. Warning lights illuminated across her instrument panel like a Christmas tree, and the aircraft shuddered as hydraulic pressure began bleeding away through dozens of tiny holes. "Phantom 7-7 is taking fire," she transmitted, her voice tight but controlled. "Multiple SAM sites active. Ground actual, you've got company coming your way." Kim could see it now, the muzzle flashes erupting from positions that had been invisible minutes before. The convoy had stumbled into a kill zone, a carefully prepared ambush that had waited patiently for the right moment to spring. Machine gun fire stitched across the desert around his vehicles, and somewhere in the distance, he could hear the distinctive whistle of incoming mortars. "Phantom 7-7, this is ground actual." Kim's voice carried the controlled urgency of a soldier under fire. "We're in heavy contact. I've got at least 3 machine gun positions and indirect fire incoming. We need immediate close air support." Reeves was already rolling into her attack run, despite the damage to her aircraft and the forest of surface-to-air missiles reaching up from the desert floor. This was what she trained for, what every hour in the simulator and every live-fire exercise had prepared her to do. Provide close air support to soldiers who were counting on her to keep them alive. The GAU-8 cannon spoke with the voice of thunder, its 7 rotating barrels vomiting 30 rounds at a rate of 3,900 per minute. Each round weighed 1.5 pounds and traveled at 3,500 feet per second, transforming anything it touched into component atoms. The first burst walked across a machine gun position, erasing it from existence in a cloud of dust and debris. But the enemy had prepared for this too. As Reeves pulled up from her strafing run, another missile streaked toward her damaged aircraft. This time, the SA-6 found its mark. The warhead detonated just behind the A-10's right engine, the explosion sending shrapnel through critical systems and setting fuel lines ablaze. The aircraft lurched violently to the right, engines spooling down as automated systems tried to contain the damage. Phantom 77 is hit, Reeves reported, her voice now strained as she fought to maintain control. Right engine is gone, multiple system failures. I'm losing altitude. Below her, the convoy continued its desperate fight for survival, but their guardian angel was falling from the sky, trailing smoke and flame as she searched for somewhere safe to set down an aircraft that was rapidly becoming unflyable. The desert rushed up to meet her as Reeves struggled with controls that responded sluggishly to her inputs. Her training told her to eject, to trust the Martin Baker seat to carry her clear of the dying aircraft. But her heart told her that the soldiers below needed every round of ammunition, every second of close air support she could provide. She chose to stay. Captain Reeves had perhaps 90 seconds to decide how she wanted to die. She could eject, trusting her survival training and the hope that search and rescue could reach her before enemy forces did. Or she could stay with her aircraft, using the last moments of controlled flight to eliminate as many threats as possible before physics claimed both her and mercy. The choice wasn't difficult. 27 vehicles full of American soldiers were fighting for their lives below, outnumbered and outgunned by an enemy that had prepared this ambush for weeks. Every machine gun position she could eliminate, every enemy soldier she could neutralize, might mean the difference between those soldiers going home to their families or coming home in aluminum boxes. Her right engine was completely dead, the left engine running rough and losing power with each passing second. Hydraulic fluid painted abstract patterns across her canopy as systems that kept the aircraft controllable bled their life essence into the desert air. The stick felt mushy in her hands, responding to her inputs with increasing reluctance. But the GAU-8 cannon still had ammunition, and as long as she could point the aircraft at enemy positions, she could still fight. Reeves rolled into another attack run, this one steeper and more aggressive than any she'd attempted before. With her aircraft crippled and her engines failing, she had to get close to ensure accuracy. The desert floor rushed toward her at an alarming rate as she lined up on a mortar position that was dropping shells dangerously close to the convoy's defensive perimeter. The cannon roared again, its muzzle flash visible even in daylight as 30-millimeter rounds carved a path of destruction across the enemy position. The mortars fell silent, their crews either dead or driven to cover by the devastating accuracy of her fire. Phantom 77, what's your status? The voice belonged to Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez, the airborne controller orbiting at a safe altitude in an E-3 Sentry. Her radar showed Reeves' aircraft losing altitude rapidly, its transponder signal growing weaker with each sweep. "I'm flying on fumes and prayer," Reeves replied, her voice tight with concentration as she fought to maintain level flight. "Left engine is running rough, all hydraulics are gone, and I'm bleeding fuel from multiple punctures. But I've still got bullets, and there are still bad guys down there." Martinez had been controlling air operations for 12 years, long enough to recognize the sound of a pilot who wasn't coming home. Protocol demanded that she order Reeves to eject immediately, to preserve the life of a trained pilot who represented millions of dollars in training and years of combat experience. But Martinez also understood what was happening on the ground. The convoy was still under heavy fire, still taking casualties from positions that only close air support could neutralize. Sometimes, protocol had to yield to reality. Phantom 77, you're cleared for all remaining attacks. Make them count. Reeves acknowledged with 2 clicks of her radio transmit button, conserving her breath for the work ahead. The targeting pod still functioned, painting infrared pictures of enemy positions with crystal clarity. She could see muzzle flashes, could track the movement of personnel between covered positions, could identify the high-value targets whose elimination would break the ambush. Her third attack run targeted an anti-aircraft gun that had been hidden beneath camouflage netting, its crew confident that their concealment would protect them from aerial observation. The GAU-8's depleted uranium rounds disagreed, penetrating the gun's armor and detonating its ammunition supply in a spectacular fireball. As she pulled up from the attack, Reeves felt the aircraft shudder and then begin a shallow descent that she couldn't arrest. The left engine was finally giving up, its damaged components seizing as lubrication systems failed and internal temperatures climbed beyond design limits. Time was running out, but she still had ammunition and there were still threats on the ground. The fourth and final attack run would be different from the others, not just because it would be her last, but because Captain Reeves had decided to turn her dying aircraft into a weapon itself. With both engines failing and control surfaces responding only intermittently, she couldn't pull up from a normal strafing run. Instead, she would have to use the aircraft's remaining kinetic energy to devastating effect. She selected her target carefully, a concentration of enemy vehicles that had been positioned to block the convoy's escape route. Intelligence later determined that this was the command element of the ambush force, containing the communications equipment and senior leadership that coordinated the entire attack. Ground actual, this is Phantom 77, Reeves transmitted, her voice remarkably calm given the circumstances. I'm going to clear your exit route. When you see the fireball, move fast and don't look back. Staff Sergeant Kim understood immediately. The pilot who had been protecting them for the last 20 minutes was about to sacrifice herself to give them a chance at survival. He keyed his radio with hands that weren't quite steady. Roger, Phantom 77, we'll make it count. Reeves pushed the throttle on her failing left engine to maximum power, coaxing every available pound of thrust from machinery that was already operating far beyond its design limits. The aircraft accelerated into a shallow dive, gaining speed as gravity and physics conspired to turn Mercy into a guided missile weighing 16,000 pounds. At 500 feet above ground level, she fired her remaining ammunition in one continuous burst, the GAU-8 cannon emptying its magazine in a stream of depleted uranium that carved through vehicles and personnel with equal effectiveness. The enemy command post disappeared in a cloud of smoke and debris as rounds designed to penetrate tank armor made short work of thin-skinned vehicles and human bodies. At 200 feet, Reeves made her final transmission. Tell my mom I kept my promise. The impact occurred at 4:17 hours local time. According to the flight data recorder, which survived the crash despite the subsequent explosion, Captain Reeves maintained control of her aircraft until the moment of ground contact. Analysis of the wreckage pattern indicated that she had deliberately aimed for the center of the remaining enemy positions, maximizing the damage while ensuring that her sacrifice would have tactical significance. The explosion could be seen from 5 miles away, a column of fire and smoke that rose into the desert sky like a funeral pyre for heroes. When the smoke cleared, the ambush was broken, the surviving enemy forces scattered and demoralized by the destruction of their command element. The convoy reached safety 47 minutes later, all 27 vehicles and their crews intact despite the intensity of the engagement. They owed their lives to a pilot most of them had never met, a small woman who had chosen to die fighting rather than live with the knowledge that she might have done more. But the story didn't end with the crash. In fact, it was just beginning. The first indication that something extraordinary had occurred came from an unexpected source. A Predator drone conducting a routine surveillance mission 40 miles south of the crash site. At 9:23 hours, nearly 5 hours after Captain Reeves' aircraft had impacted the desert floor, the drone's operator noticed something that shouldn't have been possible. An aircraft was moving at low altitude through a mountain valley, flying a heading that would take it toward friendly airspace. The thermal signature was consistent with a single-engine aircraft, possibly damaged, definitely flying below normal operational altitudes. Most significantly, the aircraft was squawking an emergency transponder code that hadn't been used since the Gulf War. Technical Sergeant Maria Santos stared at her display in disbelief, then called over her supervisor. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the same NCO who had received the mysterious radio transmission hours earlier, took one look at the screen and reached for the secure phone. "Sir, you need to see this," she told General Webb, her voice tight with controlled excitement. "We've got an aircraft, single engine, flying through Valley 7 Alpha approximately 40 miles south of the Reeves crash site." Webb's response was immediate and emphatic. "That's impossible. We have positive confirmation of aircraft destruction. Satellite imagery shows impact and explosion at grid 77 Alpha." "Yes, sir, but the transponder code matches Phantom 77. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for nearly 15 seconds. When Webb spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a man who had seen enough war to know that impossible things happened with disturbing regularity. "Get me a visual confirmation. Launch everything we have." Within 30 minutes, two F-16 Fighting Falcons were racing south at maximum cruise speed, their pilots tasked with the impossible mission of intercepting a ghost. Captain Jake "Viper" Morrison, son of the colonel who had briefed the original mission, led the flight with the skeptical professionalism of a pilot who had seen too many radar ghosts and false alarms. "Phantom 77, this is Viper 11 on guard frequency. If you're out there, please respond." The response came immediately, weak but unmistakably clear. "Viper 11, this is Phantom 77. I'm still here." Morrison's blood pressure spiked as he recognized the voice. Captain Alexis Reeves had been his roommate at the Air Force Academy, had stood next to him at graduation when they'd received their pilot wings. He'd attended her memorial service just 6 hours earlier, had watched as her parents received the folded flag that honored their daughter's sacrifice. "But dead pilots don't respond to radio calls." "Phantom 77, confirm your position and status," Morrison transmitted, his voice carefully controlled despite the emotional turmoil churning in his chest. "I'm approximately 30 miles south of my last known position, flying at Angels 2, single-engine operation. I've got battle damage, but I'm still mission capable." Morrison accelerated to military power, closing the distance to the mysterious aircraft as quickly as possible. When he finally acquired visual contact, what he saw defied everything he thought he knew about aviation, physics, and the nature of reality itself. It was definitely an A-10 Thunderbolt II, but it looked like something that had been dragged through hell and reassembled by committee. The right engine was completely gone, leaving only twisted metal and exposed wiring. The left wing was shredded, held together by cables and prayers. The vertical stabilizer had been nearly severed, hanging at an impossible angle that should have made controlled flight impossible. Yet somehow, impossibly, Captain Alexis Reeves was still flying. The aircraft that limped through the desert sky looked more like modern art than military aviation, a testament to the legendary durability of the A-10 Thunderbolt II and the skill of its pilot. Morrison flew formation with the damaged aircraft, documenting the extent of damage with his aircraft's cameras while trying to process what he was seeing. The right side of the fuselage was completely blackened, metal twisted and torn, by an explosion that should have vaporized the entire aircraft. Hydraulic fluid streamed from multiple punctures, creating a rainbow trail in the desert air. The landing gear hung partially deployed, damaged by shrapnel, and held in position only by gravity and structural debris. But perhaps most remarkably, the GAU-8 cannon was still intact, its 7 barrels protruding from the aircraft's nose like the teeth of some mechanical predator. Ammunition counters showed that the weapon had been fired to empty, every round expended in the fight that was supposed to have killed both aircraft and pilot. "Jesus Christ, Ghost," Morrison whispered over the radio, using her call sign instead of her official designation. "How are you still flying this thing?" Reeves' response came through clearly despite the interference caused by her damaged communications equipment. "Carefully." The simple answer carried volumes of meaning. She was flying an aircraft that had been written off as destroyed, maintaining control through sheer skill and determination, nursing damaged systems that should have failed hours ago. Every minute she remained airborne was a victory against physics, engineering, and common sense. Morrison began coordinating recovery operations, alerting search and rescue teams and requesting medical support at the nearest friendly airfield. But even as he transmitted coordinates and status reports, part of his mind struggled to accept what he was witnessing. The explosion at Grid 77 Alpha had been real. Satellite imagery confirmed impact and destruction. The fireball had been visible for miles, the smoke column photographed by multiple intelligence assets. Every piece of evidence indicated that Captain Reeves and her aircraft had been obliterated in a final act of sacrifice. Yet here she was, flying a machine that had no business being airborne, demonstrating the kind of piloting skill that would be analyzed and studied for decades to come. The official after-action reports would struggle to reconcile the conflicting evidence, to explain how an aircraft could be simultaneously destroyed and operational. "Phantom 77, what's your fuel status?" Morrison asked, recognizing that even miracles had limits. "I'm running on fumes and attitude," Reeves replied, her voice carrying a hint of the dry humor that had made her popular with ground crews. "I figure I've got maybe 20 minutes before this thing decides it's had enough." 20 minutes to cover 40 miles of hostile territory, navigate through mountain passes that barely provided clearance for her damaged aircraft, and reach an airfield where emergency crews waited with foam trucks and medical teams. It should have been impossible, another entry in the growing list of things that Captain Alexis Reeves was accomplishing despite the laws of physics. But she'd made it this far against impossible odds. 20 more minutes seemed almost easy by comparison. The emergency at Al-Udeid Air Base transformed from controlled professionalism to barely contained chaos as word spread that Phantom 77 was inbound. Medical teams scrambled to prepare for trauma treatment, while maintenance crews readied equipment for what would certainly be the most challenging recovery operation in recent memory. General Webb stood in the control tower, watching radar screens that showed the impossible. A single aircraft approaching from the south, flying at minimum altitude, escorted by 2 F-16s whose pilots were providing running commentary on damage that defied rational explanation. "She's got maybe 5 minutes of fuel remaining," Morrison reported, his voice tight with concern as he maintained position alongside the damaged A-10. "The left engine is running rough and throwing metal, and I can see control surfaces that are barely attached. I don't know how she's maintaining level flight." In Mercy's cockpit, Captain Reeves was performing a delicate ballet with controls that responded unpredictably and systems that threatened to fail without warning. The stick required constant pressure to maintain straight flight. Hydraulic fluid had long since stopped flowing to critical control surfaces, and the remaining engine was operating far beyond its design limits. But she was still flying, still making progress toward home, still proving that determination could overcome physics when properly applied. The radio crackled with the voice of the approach controller, his professional calm masking the tension that filled the control tower. Phantom 77, Al-Udeid approach control. You're cleared for straighten approach to runway 27 right. Emergency crews are standing by. Through her cracked canopy, Reeves could see the airfield approaching, its runways marked by emergency vehicles whose flashing lights created a light show against the desert darkness. She'd never seen anything more beautiful in her life. But landing would be the most dangerous part of her journey. The damaged aircraft would have to slow down, configure for landing, and touch down on a runway with precision measured in feet rather than miles. With compromised control surfaces and unpredictable hydraulics, the approach would require every bit of skill she'd acquired in thousands of hours of flight time. Al-Udeid approach Phantom 77, she transmitted, her voice steady despite the challenges ahead. I'll take that runway now, and approach. Tell General Webb that Ghost is coming home. The approach began at a higher speed than normal, Reeves lacking the confidence that her damaged aircraft would respond properly to sudden throttle reductions. She configured the aircraft for landing incrementally, extending flaps and landing gear in careful stages while monitoring systems that continued to degrade with each passing minute. The left engine chose that moment to surge violently, its damaged components finally reaching the limits of mechanical endurance. The aircraft yawed hard to the right, requiring immediate corrective action to prevent an uncontrolled departure from level flight. Morrison, flying alongside as a witness and guardian angel, keyed his radio urgently. Phantom 77, your engine is throwing flames. You need to shut it down immediately. But shutting down the engine would mean no power, no hydraulics, no chance of executing a controlled landing. Reeves made the decision that only a true pilot could make. She kept the dying engine running, accepting the risk of catastrophic failure in exchange for the power needed to reach the runway. 3 miles from touchdown, traveling at 180 miles per hour, in an aircraft that should have been in a museum of impossible things. The final approach to runway 27 right became a masterpiece of aviation skill, a demonstration of what human determination could accomplish when supported by superior training and unshakable resolve. Captain Reeves flew an aircraft that responded to control inputs like a wounded animal, unpredictable and dangerous, requiring constant adjustment and anticipation. Emergency crews lined the runway, their vehicles positioned to respond instantly to whatever form of catastrophe might unfold. Foam trucks stood ready to suppress fires, ambulances waited to transport casualties, and crash recovery teams prepared for the complex task of extracting a pilot.